big sky, big potential. In association with Mills and Reeve, this is Eastern Promise. Achieving more together. Welcome to the Eastern Promise podcast, the show that runs the very best of the east of England up the flagpole for the whole wide world to salute. And salute they jolly well do. I'm your host, Mike Rigby, and this week we return to our series on how the Brecks area of Norfolk might support the growth of Cambridge. Having previously considered strategic regional growth and the opportunities for businesses, we turn our attention to housing. On planning, community engagement, infrastructure and more, our panel joins me to discuss a regional approach to the growth of Cambridge. It's more than one episode can hold, so here's part one of our look at planning, housing and placemaking on the Cambridge-Norwich corridor on this week's Eastern Promise. The many mentions of Cambridge in the Red Book, which is released by the Treasury to accompany the budget, shows that central government understands the importance of Cambridge to the UK economy and is looking for ways to put rocket boosters under the city. If you doubt me, just look at the announcements the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Rachel Reeves, made the same week this podcast is released. Over a double bill of episodes, we'll be exploring a new facet of how the rest of the east of England might both aid and benefit from this growth, taking as our case study the Brecks area in Norfolk. We've previously discussed the strategic and commercial opportunities that greater regional collaboration might provide. And now our attention turns to the thorny matter of housing, placemaking and communities. Thank goodness that for such a discussion, Eastern Promise has been able to assemble a supergroup of experts, professionals and elected representatives to shed light, not heat, on these issues. So, without further ado, let's meet our expert panellists.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, my name's Stephen Scowen. I'm what we call the Strategic Growth Manager at Breckland Council, which, in simple terms, deals with all matters economic growth. So it's housing growth, including affordable elements of that, of course, along with commercial growth as well.
Thank you, Sarah.
Morning, Mike. I'm Sarah Suggitt. I'm the Deputy Leader at Breckland Council and also the Cabinet Member for Housing and Planning.
So you're the perfect person to have in part of our discussions today. Matt.
Yeah, my name's Matt Wood. I'm an architect. I spend most of my time with Feilden and Mawson, just round the corner of the river there. I have been working in mixed use and housing architecture and development for, well, longer than I care to remember. Housing's my main thing, but I've always been interested in the growth of towns, particularly Wyndham, where I live. I've seen it change a lot in the 15 years that I've been back in Norfolk after time away. So I've got quite a broad interest. In your notes for the intros, you've put me down as Forest Village Advocate, which is something we'll come to later, but I've got a particular interest in alternative models of housing development, in which maybe we'll touch on, I don't know.
And I have to say, anyone who's rolled their eyes and glossed over when I started banging on about forest villages, Matt is the man you have to blame.
It's all my fault.
Because it was his presentation that made me go, wow, this is a great idea. And Carla.
I'm Carla Barreto. I'm currently Deputy Mayor at Thetford Town Council. I'm on my second mandate as a councillor there. I have different hats, apart from the incoming mayorship next year. I'm also one of the directors of a CIC recently formed, the Portuguese Offer International Trade Exchange, which promotes economic development and growth between the UK and Portugal and Portuguese-speaking countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Esmee.
Hi everyone, I'm Esmee Wilcox and I help organisations think about the past and the present and the future in how they make decisions today. And I tend to work with organisations that are very aware of how interconnected a lot of the issues are that they're dealing with and are observing the pace of change and help them work with those two kinds of dynamics in their work. And to sort of put it in context, something I've been doing recently is working with local authority partners in part of our East of England region and thinking about changing patterns of migration. And I'm also currently working with a UK-based national and international charity thinking about how they reform their purpose and identity and their strategy in the face of growing market competition for what they do. So a breadth of things, and my company's called Socially Adept, and it's lovely to be here with you all today.
It's absolutely lovely to have you here because I think you're going to bring a very important perspective to these discussions. Anna.
Last but not least.
Definitely not.
I am Anna Aldous. I'm a Principal Associate here at Mills and Reeve. I am a development lawyer by trade. And I specialise mainly in large-scale mixed-use developments that are predominantly residential-led. But my particular passion and focus is on what I call stewardship. Some people call it placemaking. And basically the long-term vision and commitment to creating great places for communities to thrive, and also thinking about the long-term ownership and maintenance of those in perpetuity for the community benefit. So this is right up my street today.
Good. We're absolutely delighted to have you here, all of you. And I should say before we get cracking, I haven't just alighted upon a place having looked at a map and thought Breckland looks quite interesting and it's well placed. No, I have to say I have skin in the game. I am a Breckland resident, proudly so. Lived there for a quarter of a century. So yes, very much almost got my visitor's card, I should say, as the old joke goes, which I will be cutting because that wasn't funny at all. So, the panel is entitled Cambridge's Housing Need and Breckland's Opportunity. So, what I'm going to do with this the first talking point, is ask Anna, who spends a lot of time both here and in Cambridge, to just talk briefly to what the housing need and the situation is in Cambridge. And then I'm going to ask Stephen to come in, give us a sort of pen picture in a second of Breckland. Anna.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So, Cambridge, I think we all acknowledge, has been kind of an economic bubble now of growth for some time, and not just housing growth. It's been predominantly led by, a really energetic, there's a nice buzz about Cambridge, life sciences, research, really strong economic growth. And that has obviously then had an impact upon the need for housing. So I think my headline points would be shortage of housing, but also affordability is going to be really key. We've got some great, really forward-thinking institutions in Cambridge, the biomedical campus, Addenbrooke's and so forth. But I think sometimes where things get a little bit lost in the conversation there are still some really significant numbers of key workers, nurses, teachers, things like that, who are going to struggle with the affordability issue in somewhere like Cambridge. So numbers, yes, mirrors the national picture. Affordability, I think, is actually really pertinent when it comes to Cambridge.
Thank you very much. Stephen, if you could just give us a pen picture of Breckland so we can sort of let that inform the discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So Breckland, for those that don't know, is right slap bang in the middle of Norfolk. It forms about 500 square miles-ish of beautiful countryside. It's largely a rural district, but we have 5 sort of major towns within that, if you like, which form key service centres, not just for the population that they serve, but the sort of hinterland around that, as you would expect in a rural area. We have the towns of Attleborough and, of course, Thetford, which are located on the A11, which form the gateway to Norfolk, obviously heavily trafficked. And then we have Dereham and Swaffham along the sort of A47 corridor coming in from the west there. And then Watton's kind of in the middle. So we have these 5 towns with different needs and different sort of growth aspirations and levels of growth that we've encountered historically and that we might see again in the future. But big levels of growth, obviously, around Attleborough and Thetford that are already committed, and between them they have sustainable urban extensions comprising about 9,000 homes. So lots of growth potential, predominated largely, of course, by sort of rural-based industry, as you would expect in a rural area. However, you may have heard about the Future Breckland exercise, which garnered about 22,000 interactions there, and very much the thrust of that is about what is needed to move Breckland and the economy into the sort of 21st century, if you like, and everything that goes with that. So, yeah, we're kind of well set up now to deliver quite an exciting growth agenda.
Sarah, what are the challenges for a council forming an economic and a housing policy around an area that's not in your control?
There's quite a few, to be honest. Where we do have some of those major infrastructure pieces like railway lines, obviously that can allow us to bring certain types of economic growth in, but obviously it's the skill set that we need from our residents to be able to work in such places. Somewhere like Thetford, for example, you know, it's recognised Thetford is one of the most deprived areas in the country, but people still aspire to live in Thetford. It's a beautiful place. We're just on the edge of Thetford Forest. There's a lot going on for Thetford, but as the district council, we can't do that all on our own. We need to work with partners, other organisations, other agencies to help bring that together. Talking about things around the rail, you know, working with the likes of Greater Anglia, it's not as easy as one would like to hope that it could be, but we need those guys on board to be able to, I suppose, get across what the potential is in places like that. We struggle with further education, so our children, we can educate them quite well up to a high school level. We can kind of tick the box from a college level, but actually we go beyond that and we're really struggling. So we're sending a lot of our young people away on the hope that they'll come back one day, but actually they come back often once they've had their family come back to child. We've got a really elderly population, so it's a real difficult balance around youngsters, elderly people, the skill set, the infrastructure, and it is a challenge that we can't do. We can't face that on our own.
Absolutely. I mean, I'll just say a quick word for Dr. Catherine Richards at East Norfolk Sixth Form College. That's in Galston, and we all, you know, most listeners will know about Galston and Great Yarmouth, a very deprived area. However, if you look on LinkedIn, there you see pictures of their students in Beijing. You see pictures of their students in South Korea having all these amazing experiences. We're in Beijing so the students can practice their Mandarin. So, you know, you're right, it is a challenge. There are great examples of hope that we can learn from, emulate and take forward. What I want to do now is come to Carla, because we're already talking about your place. So we'll get you to give us a pin picture as much as Stephen did on Thetford.
Thanks, Mike. No pressure. No, having heard the people around the table today, I do agree. Thetford does have its challenges. I'll start with that. But we are resilient. We are a resilient community. We are one of the largest market towns in Breckland, and we contribute substantially to the whole economic aspect of not only Breckland but Norfolk as a whole. I believe that Sarah mentioned that there is a lack of skills. People tend to return older in life after they settle with families and whatnot. I agree. I think more investment is needed in Thetford. I wouldn't say Thetford alone. I say across Breckland and the whole of East Anglia, but particularly Thetford and Breckland, in skills development, youth services as well, something that's been sort of cut back severely over the years. You're now starting to feel that down on the community level. Yeah, people do get, we have our local schools, people do get their training, they go off to Cambridge, Norwich and outside the region, whatever, to do their degrees, but then tend to get the jobs outside because there's a lack of offering locally. This is something that I think needs to be developed, that is an area that we need to improve on. Thetford is a great town. We have natural beauty in bounds. We have lakes, we have rivers. There's no doubt about it. There is a big point of attraction for Thetford as a whole. It's very historical. We have a lot of history there and some cute museums that, you know, I invite everybody to visit. So we have a lot going for us as a community. It's uniquely diverse, and that's a point that I'm close to. There are a lot of migrant communities. A big percentage of the Thetford population is from different nationalities. I can see for myself as a Portuguese speaker that Portuguese-speaking community is one of the largest and most well-established at the moment. So we're in second, third generation of a Portuguese background there, with, you know, people just having businesses, kids having, already having grandchildren there that I know of. But there are a lot of others. You know, there's the Polish, Lithuanian, massive Eastern community, and a few others as well. I think, I would say from my point of view, we're lacking a little bit of being a bit more assertive in how we represent ourselves as a community. And I say that to my own, and as a personal critic to my own communities and to migrant communities. It's the only one in my council that is not a British or local person per se. And whilst that's great for me, because I'm with a great group, that means there's lack of representation and views, different viewpoints across at the table when the decisions are made for what is important to your community. Where there's such a disparity between the number of residents and their priorities or where their needs are, and what the representation really at decision making, and that is something that I've been trying to fight off. I think that's why I became involved, and I've been part of a lot of organisations and charities with when it comes to democracy and civic activism, trying to incentivize more people to be more aware of the needs to participate at local level, not only to vote, but put themselves as candidates for representation at local level, and to be more involved, so they can have a say in what really decisions steer their lives. Ultimately, they're on the ground, they're the ones who are going to be feeling the burden of those decisions. But yeah, Mike, it's a great town with great spirit. I think we just need to put our heads together and do a bit more.
I have to say, as someone who's Jack Weaver, who many around this table will know, who's now the Chief Operating Officer of Norfolk Chamber of Commerce, when he was the managing the Greater Thetford Partnership, he and I went on an walking audio tour of the town, and that's when I really got to know Thetford. The historical and cultural assets there are. Well, they are unique, but they are very hard to beat, because there is, I said this in King's Lynn, and the same is true there. It has good bones. It really has good bones. You've got the stuff that can't be taken away from you is there. And it's just how we build that out, make it work for everyone. And also, this is not my phrase, and I won't say whose phrase it was. Someone I spoke to about this put it thus: how do we get Thetford to pick Cambridge's pocket in a nice, collegiate way? And so that Cambridge sort of offers its pocket, as it were. Matt, it's time to bring you in on this one. What do you make of what you've heard so far? And from your point of view as a placemaker, how can you make this sort of soup of issues work in a way that works for Cambridge, yes, gets that investment that Cambridge can attract, but also is true to Breckland, true to Thetford, and respectful of those communities?
Well, it was interesting that your pickpocketing phrase was. I was about to sort of jump in and say that there's quite a clear proposition for the discussion, which is how can the Brecks support the growth of Cambridge, which I think is a different question from how does Thetford become a great place. It's quite. It's a subset of a question about how does Thetford become great. Very specifically, the proposition here is Cambridge is hot. Or rich, if you like, rich gentleman with an open tailcoat pocket that's there to be picked. So the way I've been thinking about this coming into this is very specifically from that point of view. How do the Brecks, rather than Breckland, how do the Brecks offer something that would say... So I suppose the proposition is, if you're coming to work in Cambridge and you're looking at the places you might settle your family, Cambridge has done a brilliant job already, and you mentioned it right at the start, actually. The fact there's a really good report relatively recently from the Cambridge Quality Panel, which gives a really good overview of what have we got? We got North Stowe, Great Knighton, Trumpington Meadows. What's the one? Yes, Auchenbury. There's a cluster of new places that Cambridge has made, but they're all off to the sort of west and north. Cambridge looking at London, really, I think. So I think it's a kind of mini version of that question, which is, so if you arrive in Cambridge to work in a new industry and you're sort of saying, where do I set up? How does Breckland, which is only... It's only a stop in the other direction, so it's no further from the centre of Cambridge than North Stowe is, let's say. Mm-hmm. How does Breckland say, here we are? And the brilliant things that Carla's talks about in terms of the physical quality of the place, it's a lovely place, so how do you capitalise on that? So it's really... I think Cambridge has really stolen a march, or, it's been thinking about this for 20 years, and it has done something amazing to sort of raise the level of quality in all those places. And so I suppose my take on this is, in those new places that Breckland are about to make, Kingsfleet is really the die is cast there already. That's, that all happened 10 years ago, but the next places beyond that are in the local plan. What happens at Barker's Farm, what happens around Snetterton. I mean, I'm predominantly interested in those because further north you have other places, but they're not part of that, perhaps not an obvious part of that Cambridge discussion. So it's that section from Thetford, and I live in Wyndham, so Wyndham is just another bead on that string of pearls, if you like, up to Norwich, which includes the potential new town at Hethel, it includes Snetterton, Wyndham itself, and you come back down the line. So I suppose from my point of view, it's like, what could Breckland do, what could the Brecks do to take inspiration from how Cambridge has really upped its game in terms of quality, and say, well, North Stowe is one option, but North Thetford is another option, and it's brilliant because ... and it's the sort of what are the dots that say it's a brilliant place.
Yeah, I mean, I light on Thetford because obviously if you look at a map, it is the most obvious. And it also, having been there and you see the assets, you see that actually this is something, it's a great hook. So, Esmee, I'm sure the people of Thetford, and I'm sure Carla will speak to this, are perfectly aware of their assets. But how do you raise the salience, I suppose, of those assets?
I guess I'm thinking about the history on the back of what you've said, Matt. And I like the fact that you're talking about thinking quite holistically across the region about this and the knock-on consequences, because there is a pattern of housing prices goes up because people are recognising that they can commute into Thetford. It's I was on that train recently and there was a whole load of people from Norwich going into Cambridge, and what that does for an area. And we know Thetford was the town where people left London to, and housing authorities in London placing people there. And I imagine that there are things that we can think about in terms of that integration of new communities and growth that are worth kind of considering. I also think, going back to history, what are the ways in which people of Thetford are proud and think about their history, and using that as the starting point to ask people, how do you see this? It's very one-sided, and I think the potential of that question that is problematic is the sort of potential for extracting an asset from a community of people, rather than saying, what is the reciprocal relationship that we want as the people of Thetford with a burgeoning Cambridge, and how are we intending to participate that, and that being the starting point for dialogue about the kind of growth and the kind of things that we want. And let's not forget, there's one thing that comes forward. We're talking about the sort of physical movements of people. I think we're sort of sense of space in this is physical movements of people. COVID has changed things a lot. We talked a lot in COVID about exodus from big cities. We talked a lot about hubs and spokes of where big companies work. I'm really interested in the places in Thetford where there are startups already that are connected to the university, that are connected to the campus in Cambridge, that are connected to New York and Johannesburg and Perth, but are perhaps not on people's radar at the moment, because I imagine there's good internet connection, and I imagine there are ingenious entrepreneurial people who are doing stuff in spite of what we may be aware of here. That's the conversation that I think is really interesting in thinking about this bigger question.
Anna, you were nodding vigorously then, and I want to take your thoughts.
I almost want to flip the question on its head, having listened to all that, and not what we can take, or not what Thetford contributes to Cambridge, but actually how do we make places like Thetford, like Attleborough, Wyndham, Hethel, when it comes forward, great places in and of themselves. And I think there's a great economic argument for leveraging the growth in Cambridge, because, and Norwich Research Park, these are world-leading institutions that you aren't going to replicate in a market town in the Brecks, let's be honest. But I think for me, when I start with a development site, it starts with a community. And that isn't just the new community that's going to live there, but what about the existing community it has to mix with? And I think on your mantra, Mr. Rigby, of making this a really positive conversations, it turns negative when these kind of new developments are seen as a drain. it turns positive when you say, as part of this new development, these are the opportunities that are going to come. And that's what's really sometimes gone wrong with new developments, is when you don't get that community enablement piece right from the get-go, because they turn into hollow spaces, not the thriving places that they could actually be. Totally on board with leveraging some phenomenal growth and talent in Snetterton, in the research park, down the biomedical campus, absolutely. And I think infrastructure investment is key, physical in terms of road and rail, but also virtual. I like this point about the internet, and having lived in the Brecks, it's not always super fast. I'll leave that conversation to another day. But for me, it is also about investment in a curation of place for the community benefit, and that has to start with Thetford. It does not start in Cambridge.
I have to say, I'm so glad you're here, because you're like my sort of Jiminy Crickets, because I have a tendency to just look at, hey, this is great, you can do all these things, and I think it's probably a hangover from working in Parliament for too long, and you just think everything's dead easy, and you just look at a map, and I'm really glad you're all here and sort of reining in my natural ebullience with not what could be done, but what should be done. And I think that's really important. But, Stephen, could you just pick up what Anna's point there, if you wouldn't mind, and reflect on it, but also look beyond Thetford at the wider Breckland, and how you want to try and, as we say, leverage both Norwich and Cambridge in a way that works for Breckland and works for your council?
Yeah, I will have a go.
Thank you.
That connectivity piece is really crucial, as we keep saying, that the connectivity that exists coming through the Breckland area by both road and rail, as we keep saying, is really crucial. And the opportunity that surrounds the movement of people and freight via road and rail along those routes is really important. And how we capitalise upon that opportunity, I'm not necessarily convinced I know all of the answers right now, but certainly it's right that we hold a joined-up conversation around that to be able to come up with the correct strategy for capitalising upon it. In growth terms, I suppose historically, rightly or wrongly, local authorities have tended to focus on growth delivery in a bit of a piecemeal manner via the planning system over there, via housing teams perhaps over here, and via commercial growth via an economic development team. So it's all kind of perhaps happened a bit in isolation in the past, as I say, rightly or wrongly. What we're trying to do as a council now is take a very much more joined up, much broader look at the way, for example, with our recent housing strategy that we adopted, that takes a really broad look at the way the housing market operates in this part of the world, what the challenges and opportunity are surrounding housing in this part of the world, and what a attempt at a joined-up strategy in collaboration with all of the relevant partners looks like in order to capitalise upon that. And I think that's really exciting, and we've started that conversation in earnest now, and we will take a whole council approach to delivery, because that's the way we need to look at these things now. To capitalise upon that opportunity takes investment, and at the moment the way we're set up doesn't necessarily facilitate that investment most easily, and I would advocate that we look at ways of making that happen more easily, and there are options surrounding that, of course, and if we can do that, then it makes it a lot easier to consider growth at scale and deliver all of the good things that come with that on the back of it. But we will need to address the challenges surrounding delivery, of course.
Thank you, and that's really great to hear that kind of whole council look on things. And one of the things I saw recently, and I think it's the most, at the time of recording, it's the most recent episode on the podcast, is I went out to see this hub. It was a new model of doing startup space, and what they were basically doing is, you don't need X height ceiling if you just, you don't need this and you don't need that. Let's get rid of it. And they'd repurposed lab equipment that had been sitting idling one of the universities, or stuff that was about to be chucked but was perfectly good enough it could be made to work for a startup, because they haven't got pots of money. And it was in a kind of
an annex almost of NIAB in Cambridge West. So it was, I can't remember what NIAB stands for. It's the National Institute of Agriculture and Botany, I believe. But that was a great model. It was brought over from the States by a British entrepreneur and made to work, first in Camden, actually, and now in Cambridge. And I look at places like Thetford Station. So much could be done, not just at the station itself, but broader. And this could be done in Attleborough as well, and throughout. Because wasn't there at some point, I'm looking at Sarah and Stephen, some idea to actually get the stations into more kind of hubby type places? Is that something you're looking at again, afresh, or?
I was going to ask about that in the context of North Thetford. You mentioned it right at the start. I mean, we don't want to focus on difficulties, I know, but it's the story about the railway is fascinating, and you alluded to your aspirations versus the reality of it. I don't know. Is there progress to be made in terms of the better use of the railway?
So the future Breckland piece of work, which Stephen mentioned at the start, where we did, like what you were saying, Anna, it was going out, really speaking to people, and we had a huge amount of feedback, like 22,000 people, Breckland residents, engaged with that piece of work as to what it is that they would like to see, not what are we going to do to your places, what would you like to see. That document, there's like just over £700 million worth of stuff in there, which of course we'd like to do all of it. The railway pieces are part of that piece, those pieces of work. Unfortunately, they're not within all of our gift as a district council to do that and to bring that forward. We need to work with the town councils in those spaces. We need to work with Greater Anglia, like we've said before. And frustratingly, all of this stuff comes back down to money. And not everybody has got the money which is needed to do those things, which is really frustrating, because actually we're really good as a country. Nobody does this sort of perfectly themselves, but as a country we're really good at firefighting things, but putting the preventative work in at the start is something which I find, it doesn't matter where you go, whether it's talking about flooding, housing, but the preventative piece is actually where we've got to put that money in up front, and we wait to see that space of time before we start to see those benefits. And actually we seem to rather see putting money in, oh well done, we've fixed that problem, rather than how do we stop it happening in the first place. But working with partners to bring up to date, and we'd love to be able to get off the station at Attleborough and at Thetford and have a hub. We'd love for our kids to have somewhere to go, places to see. I took my daughters to London at the weekend, and you get off and I'm making sure I know where mine are. You're keeping your hands on them. They're 22 and 13, the ones that I took with me. But when you get to London, there's these independent children, and they're really used to this. They're really used to that way of life. And my kids go out where we live, and actually, it's really sad that actually they want to do those things, but the offer, what we've got there, it's not there for them. It's something that as the district we are trying really hard, and we can try and facilitate, and we do try and facilitate some of those meetings and some of those conversations, but the frustration is getting everybody on the same page, because unfortunately it's finances which do tend to put those barriers up.
Well, I'll ask Carla to come in a second, because I'd like to know about her aspirations for Thetford and for Breckland, but I will just throw, for what it's worth, the Eastern Promise hat in there and say whatever I can do to assist you in delivering those aspirations. And I say this generally in the east of England, but particularly to Breckland, and as a Breckland resident as well, responsibility to do this is to say whatever I can do to help you in that piece, then I'd be more than happy to do so. So Carla,
yes,
give us your thoughts about what is it about Thetford?
Well, the station, yes, is a recurrent issue, no doubt about it. We had this conversation at town council level, as obviously is a major concern for us as a town, as a residents. You can't really talk about the tech corridor and the commuting, or having Cambridge and Norwich as major locations where people work and study and whatnot, and live in Thetford, not having the rail links that are appropriate to serve those locations, those communities. It's fundamental that the links by rail, by road are there, and they're effective. They actually work at its best for people to live in those sort of locations, such as Thetford and others that work as ancillary towns to the main hubs like Cambridge and Norwich. The station, we had a good discussion about it. Something needs to be done with it. There's no doubt about it. We know that. Yeah, funds, resources are an issue. We were clear about it. I think there's been a little bit of sort of a laid-back approach from the rail company themselves. I think at this point is not the lack of interest or pushing for from the local authorities, whether it's at a town council level or Breckland or even other organisations. There's been a show of interest by the community groups and different even companies that would like to go in and do something at the rail station should they have the permits and the availability to do so. I think this is the conversations that we need to press forward. I think it's about getting the rail company to sit at the tables and actually get them to tell us, is the station available? What is that we can do with it so we can know and program for it? It's great to say sitting there for the right project, but what does the right project look like? And how can we, recruit, tender in the community for ideas, projects, companies to occupy it, to make it more vibrant if they just let us sit there, because it is easier in some aspects, and this is a bit of criticism, but it is easy in some aspects to leave us sitting there, because that means there's no work to be done. But this is something we need to push forward, absolutely.
It's making me think about two things. One is integrated planning. Where is the regional on this, in the way that Manchester has had that kind of regional conversation, and my understanding is kind of much more mature integrated transport. I mean, all of these are deeply connected to regional economic look rather than a piecemeal kind of look. And second is, okay, so there's three now. Second is the historic underinvestment that goes in rural areas and big infrastructure like hospitals and so on in the east of England, because you're really close to London, aren't you guys? Well, okay, so some people can participate in that, and we are really rural. So the complexity of delivering public services and infrastructure with sparser populations and coastal populations. I mean, the Public Health Report in 2021 had Chris Whitty going, we need to do something about this, but and so on and so on. And the third one is we haven't yet had a conversation about climate and because adaptation and resilience is the massive thing about prevention. The cost, I mean, if we are building housing and transport and hospitals that are not absolutely clued into the uncertainty around climate patterns that we are looking at in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years, then that's money down the drain. So I just wanted to add that one in. And I don't know what the opportunity is, because we are so massively at risk of water encroaching on, despite the beautiful dry East Anglian weather and so on. And maybe that's where are farmers in this conversation, because there's a food conversation about how do we feed the cities that's really connected into that conversation about climate and growth and so on.
On this podcast previously, we've sort of promoted the fact that if you look at Norwich, you've got the Food Enterprise Park, the Royal Norfolk Agricultural Association and the Norwich Research Park, three junctions next to each other on the A47. The Golden Croissant, if you will. That's what we call it, the Golden Croissant.
And the Food Museum in Suffolk.
And the Food Museum in Suffolk. Excellent point.
Sorry.
No, please do, because again, a point about interconnectedness. Suffolk is somewhere I struggle to get to simply because of the distances and involved, and that's how I end up probably spending a lot more time in Cambridge, because for me, just the other side of the A11 from Attleborough, it's really easy to jump on a train at Attleborough Station. Please,
the food
stop me talking.
No, but yeah, that's what I was thinking, Mike.
Great, thank you, Matt.
I was just jumping onto that point about the sort of farming and food and farming and the sort of open space kind of angle on that, which is really interesting. One of the things that's been really occurring to me as I've kind of prepared for this is the fact that where you, in the sort of southern end of your district, you've got a sort of de facto green belt, haven't you, really, with all of the blocks of forest to SSSI. And then what I didn't realise until looking at your local plan in the last few days is that additional yellow zone around them, which is the stone curlews nesting zone. So if you look at, if you treat that as a sort of de facto green belt, which is probably what you do, I don't know. So actually your scope for development immediately in the south of your area around Thetford and also around sort of Snetterton is very limited. But that does offer protection to some of that farmland, and that's a great thing, right? I mean, sort of that's a relationship between dense development and then immediately into the rural hinterland, which partly in the Brecks is that very characteristic farmland. It's very characteristic. It's open, but it's got those wonderful sort of windbreak conifers. You can see it really on the aerial photographs. So it's an amazing landscape. And then, of course, you've got the forest. So there's a whole story there about which we touched on right at the start. But that sort of green belt effect, I don't know how that limits your thinking. It must
Contorted pines, I think, is the technical term for those trees that appear in that way, I believe. Yeah. But maybe wrong. But you're absolutely right, and that's what I was trying to allude to earlier when I was talking about the development pressures that exist in the district. In the southern part, as you quite rightly observe, we have the SPA, the Special Protection Area, and the buffer zones that go around that, quite rightly, for nature protection terms. In the northern part of the district now, we are faced with nutrient neutrality and everything goes around.
So from South Norfolk and above, yes.
Which are really important. And much of our district, of course, produces food. So we have to think about how we meet these challenges in a growth context. So it is quite a sort of delicate balancing act we face.
I think to bring back sort of Cambridge slightly, I think there are lots of people working in that food space, working in innovation. I mean, the next episode, I'm bound to say, is one about 3D printing of food. Aimed towards dementia patients. Yeah, you giggle, but you may say, no, 3D printing of food, because dementia patients get a sweet tooth. You don't just get any old 3D printer and pump chocolate into it. No, special 3D printer that will print everything they need with chocolate flavour. There's all sorts of implications for that and all sorts of sectors, but I can't think of anywhere better, because of its spot in the middle, for Attleborough, Thetford, Breckland, to take advantage of bringing those together and look at sort of creating sort of various partnerships and alliances to actually start making the case. Carla, what say you, I suppose? What do you want to see come out of your community for your community?
Right, printing chocolates, that's just kind of stopped me in my tracks right there.
Where can I get some?
My thanks to Anna, Esmee, Carla, Matt, Sarah and Stephen for such an open, reflective and effective discussion. I learned so much and had my preconceptions challenged, which is never a bad thing. That was just the first part of our conversations, and the next episode, with part 2 of these discussions, will be released shortly after part 1. Look out for episode 120 in your podcast feed. This mini-series on how the Brecks can support Cambridge will continue until the climax in June, when Eastern Promise will be holding its new town sandbox, looking at how we might create a new settlement on the Cambridge-Norwich corridor and do it right. We'll be considering localised renewable energy, district heating, transport, green infrastructure and sustainable construction in a location that emphasises health and well-being. For more information, drop me a line at podcast@easternpromise.org.uk, putting sandbox in the subject line. And that's it for episode 119, a very special instalment of the Eastern Promise podcast. However, episode 120, featuring part 2 of the panel on how the Brecks can support the growth of Cambridge through housing, is available now. But that's not all. We'll have a special dispatch from the House of Commons, where the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Combined Authority, alongside Peterborough MP Andrew Pakes and Sam Carling, MP for North West Cambridgeshire, host a high-profile event to broadcast a message that theirs is an area ready, willing and able to deliver for the UK PLC. I'll be talking to Combined Authority Mayor Dr Nick Johnson direct from the Houses of Parliament, and you'll be able to hear some words from the keynote speaker, Local Growth Minister Alex Morris. And the best news is, you don't have to wait 7 days. It's available now. Yes, now! Well, what are you waiting for? Oh, this bit. I've been Mike Rigby, and we'll be again next week when, in a change to the previously announced episode, we will be talking about one of the most exciting educational developments in the east of England for many a moon. The establishment of Anglia Ruskin University, Peterborough. I'll be talking to Principal Ross Renton and Chair of the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Business Board, Al Kingsley, MBE, about how business, education and academia have collaborated on course design, as well as its unique campus. Join me then. So, bye for now. To hear other episodes of the Eastern Promise podcast and to find out more about what we do, go to our website at easternpromise.org.uk. Eastern Promise is a Priors-Croft production in association with Mills and Reeve, achieving more together.